Okay, so we should be streaming. I can't actually tell. Let's see. Yeah, okay. So it says we are now streaming. Hopefully, that is the case. A little bit delayed, but not terribly. Sorry about that. If anybody was like cares. But yeah, so we are now streaming. And we are going to hold on 1 second. Yeah, so I'm gonna leave that up for a moment while I get some water and see if people join up. So I'm gonna go get water and then we'll be back. Water because that will be good for reading aloud. Okay, so we are going to do the first chapter of Ponpara and the Great Southern Labyrinth, which we did before, but unfortunately the audio that time was echoey and really terrible. It should hopefully not be today. If someone could let me know in the chat whether the audio sounds okay before we get deeply into this, that would be good. As with yesterday, I'm still not really sure whether I want to read the read this with the braille display or just following the screen reader, but we're gonna try a little bit of both and see what happens. And let me pull up the game. Okay, so I am going to go through the description of this game one more time before we get started. This is Panpara and the Great Southern Labyrinth by Kyle Marquis. He is one of the people I follow on Twitter, and he's a very cool guy, very funny, very politically astute, very interesting. Yeah, so chosen by the gods, you must battle savage monsters, corrupt priests, and mad philosophers to save reality from the dark god of destruction. Panpara and the Great Southern Labyrinth is an interactive Bronze Age fantasy by Kyle Marquis, the first game in the Panpara trilogy, so there are 2 more of these which have not been released yet. So this is just the first one. Where your choices control the story. It's entirely text-based, without graphics or without graphics or sound effects, and fueled by the vast unstoppable power of your imagination. That is sort of their tagline for all of their games. I probably won't read that every single time. But also this game, including the code, is 430,000 words, so pretty big. Years ago, in the Behemoth War, the forces of evil tried to destroy the world with Ron, the Dark Axe of Destruction. Your parents, united with King Hyres, I had a pronunciation for this yesterday. We'll go with Hyres. To win the Behemoth War and save the kingdom, becoming legendary heroes. You have been raised far from the intrigues and corruption of the great cities, and from the plots of the gods. But after 20 years of peace, the pirate king, Lord Vankred, has found Ron. Under the threat of war, the gods grant you their powers. You must find the Mad King Hyres and defeat Vankred before he can assassinate the king and shatter the 3 nations. But the gods have their own plans for you, and so does the secret master of the Great Southern Labyrinth. So that's the tagline of the game. I'm noticing there's definitely a lot of kings here. There's Hyres and Vankred, and I'm not really sure what the relationship between them is precisely. Lord Vankred is now a pirate king. Okay. So anyway, you can play as male, female, or non-binary, gay, straight, bi, or asexual. So about that, I will be generally choosing to play the non-binary gender option, but I use she or they for the main character player surrogate. For NPCs who use whatever their pronouns that they are used given in the game are the ones we will go with. So for the player character, she and they are fairly interchangeable, but not so for the NPCs who have established pronouns. So that's sort of my thoughts on that. You can defeat enemies with swords, spells, or make allies with diplomacy, deception, and the miracles of your gods. Train your companions in alchemy, diplomacy, infiltration, or the arts of war. Explore haunted forests, corrupt cities, and jungles, littered with the remains of the fallen civilizations. Find friendship, romance, or rivalry with an immortal nymph, a desert thief, or an ambitious monarch. Unlock secret magic techniques forgotten for centuries. Survive the wrath of the emissary beasts to open the labyrinth's final door. The labyrinth holds the key to untold mysteries. Once you know the truth, whose side will you take? So that's the tagline to this game. I have played a little bit of this game before. I've gotten up to chapter 4-ish, but I don't know it super well. And we will very quickly get past where I am familiar. I know from the author's mentions on Twitter that he has implemented some text-based puzzles and is fairly excited about those. That's not really very common in this type of game, so I don't know what those will be like or how hard they will be or really anything about them except that they are there. So I look forward to finding that out. Let me get some coffee and we will begin. Okay. So, chapter 1, The World That Remains. It was a clear, cold morning, my child, and Haritha knew she was doomed. Behemoth Mountain lay in ruins, but I could hear her laughing. For was her god not the god of ruin? Oh, okay, I see. I see. So Behemoth Mountain lay in ruins, but she was laughing for her god was the god of ruin. Ruins. Or ruin. Yeah. Your mother stirs the ashes. Quick, angry motions. Everyone else who tells the story of the war rushes to its glorious conclusion. Not her. She stabs at the story, poking at bits and pieces like a bored celebrant at one of Empress Zoriza's desert feasts. Suddenly, she returns to the beginning. I was no older than you when I left home to seek glory battling the Dark Priestess. Me and Pan, the warrior king me and Pan, the warrior kings Hirus and Vankrid. Okay, so that's who they are. They were warrior kings. Okay. Who fought with your mother and father in the Great Blast War. Okay, so that's who they are. We saw their names in the summary. Cole, the satyr and his clever strategies. Hirosh, the navigator, who guarded us at sea. And little Zoriza. Oh, and the one I told you never to mention. The golden archer. I was young, but already... Your mother, Para, lapses into a reflective silence. But you know the story.
Yeah, I know that.
So now you're given your first choice. To establish your background and that of your family. So our choices are, you are already the swiftest hunter among the forest tribes. Or, you are already a renowned hunter, or a renowned warrior of the Sea Kingdoms. Or, you are already a ruthless and disciplined protector of the desert clans, defending their rights against the arrogance of the city lords. So, for this game, I want to look at not just what the choices are, but sort of internal consistency and narrative, and whether the characters and, you know, how the NPCs and player character are, for like whether they have agency, whether the choices are interesting, all of that kind of thing. So I want to try to stick with internal consistency for this playthrough. Let's go with the forest tribes. I think we'll go with that. Unfortunately, no one is tuned in here, but that's okay. This will be up for streamed later, or up for archive, so people can still watch it and whatever else. Okay, so you will click that.
Hey, Tampa.
Yeah?
Stephen Co. ETA is about half an hour.
Okay. So your mother smiles into the ashes. The Thorn tribe had never seen anyone like me, she says. In my youth, I could race through the forests here quicker than any wolf. Once I did. I ran all night and warned my father that a pack was coming. That's how I met your father. She points her blackened stick at you. You too have that speed, if you would only try. She brushes the red hair from her face, tugging absently at a lock streaked with gray. Then her eyes get a faraway look, and she remembers Haritha and the ruins of Behemoth Mountain. It was not easy to enter the mountain, even with it shattered and burning. Yeah, entering Burning Mountains tends not to be easy. That sounds difficult. The two kings and I were already exhausted from battle, but your father already knew a way inside. Your father, Pan, was never prone to boasting, but he loved that story. All those great heroes standing outside the sealed gates of the blasted mountain, bickering like spice merchants, because no one knew how to get inside. And here we have our second choice. He pulled a bent lockpick out of his scabbard and got them in through a neglected cistern. You can interrupt your mother's story with this, with your own recollection of what you've heard before. So, or armed with a bow, he crept through the desert grass and ambushed the lions guarding the secret gate. Or, long ago, he had bartered a map of the tower from a priest of a god of the god of lies, and kept his soul in the process. So we have a couple options here. Let's go with the lockpick thing. I like the idea of her having some slightly ignoble skills. So, or, yeah, then next. Then Pon held something up to the light of Zoriz's lamp. We kept arguing, of course, even as he slid the piece of iron into an old lock and forced the mechanism. Your father had a gift for mechanics. For machines, not for mechanics. My bad. And for getting into places where he wasn't allowed. You have inherited his talents. I've noticed. Others have noticed too. Be careful, my child, of what your father has taught you. You touch the beads you wear around your throat. One symbolizes your father's engineering talents. And here we have a couple of options for our deity and how our engineering mechanical abilities are used. So we have a chip of amethyst, representing Amithia, worshipped in Pon's forest home as the goddess of glory and charisma. We have a piece of garnet, sacred to Mithi, the goddess of knowledge in the Desert Empire. We have, or we have a tiny amulet sacred to Cadamus, worshipped in the Sea Kingdom as the god of courage and discipline. So we basically, this sets how some of our deity affinity, I think, and also why we do thievery or mechanical abilities too. So is it for glory, for knowledge, or for basically through courage? I think this person has grown up with a lot of stories of heroism from their parents, and they have definitely a little bit of a desire to make a name for themselves and prove that they are also, talented. So they have a little bit of a Hamilton complex. So we're going to go with glory and charisma. Welcome to our viewer. If you have questions or comments, feel free to participate in the chat. The Sea Kingdom calls Amiria the goddess of love, but to the northern river folk in the Rowan tribe from which your father hailed, she represents regal bearing, dignity, oracular brilliance, so basically like the ability to speak well, and grandeur. And yes, also the ability to sneak into places where you should not or where you do not belong, but only when necessary. So it's really interesting to me that this goddess is of like love and, presumably caring and things in this one group, but the same goddess is associated with grandeur and glory and to some degree, thievery in this other culture. So that's really interesting. Seem to have some very different ideals about who these gods are and maybe what they are actually all about. So maybe some discord or differences between the understanding of what these gods actually are and what they maybe are believed to be about, which is a theme from a lot of like Final Fantasy and stuff like that, which is I tend to appreciate. So the amethyst fragment is cold and sharp against your fingers. You remember your father's eloquence and kingly bearing, and hope that you have inherited a fraction of his dignity. You realize your mother has continued her story through the neglected cistern your father unlocked, past the trolls and divs that guarded Behemoth Mountain, to Haritha herself and her axe, which bent the servitor races to her will. The story is always the same from here. The great storm that swept aside her army of monsters, Haritha's death and her death curse, the loss of King Vankrid as the mountain crumbled, the mysterious disappearance of Harosh and the Golden Archer, the abduction of Zariza, my bad, Call's grief and rage, the heavenly temples welcoming a new generation of greedy and venal disciples, as those who had fought in the war had almost all died. And then your parents' flight here to a minor village of the northern forests. Your father's death, those were bitter years, though you were too young to remember. Par lapses into reflective silence. I'm wasting your time, she says. It is not yet dusk, and I keep you here trapped in my memories. Go outside. Find your friend, that troll. Learn from what he teaches, but do not trust him. You try not to leap to your feet. Instead, you rise carefully, careful not to strike your head on the low beams, and push aside your mother's bow and short bronze sword to claim your, and here you can choose your gender, mantle, the traditional garb of young men in the forest tribes, scarf, the traditional garb of unmarried northern women. And I clicked the wrong option. Hopefully I can change that. Oh well. So, or shroud, the traditional garb in all three kingdoms of those neither men nor women, which is what we are going to go with. Oh, are we down? Did we go down? Let's see. No, it doesn't say we went down, so I don't know why it got an error sound. Whatever. So this one passage is incredibly dense. We have a lot of information here. So we already talked about the gods having different aspects depending on where in this place you are, which kingdom you were in, which is really interesting to me. So we learn that there are races called the servitor races. We know that trolls and something called divs are examples of these. We learn that a woman named Haritha had a dark axe. We know that that's called Ron from the game description, which bent these creatures to her will, and she set them to guard the mountain that your family's party, I don't know what to call them, they're basically a D&D party, broke into and fought her off and were a part of her dying. We know that she left a death curse, though we do not know what that is yet. King Vankred, who we have learned from the description of the game, is now to reappear as a pirate king, and possibly with the Dark Axe in his possession, though we don't know how that happens yet. So there's actually quite a bit of spoilers in the description of this. That's really annoying. I almost wish I had not read it, but I did, so oh well. So Vankred, who is going to be the Pirate King in some way, came back, or was left as the Behemoth Mountain crumbled. Hirosh and the Golden Archer have disappeared. We also know she's not to speak of of the Golden Archer. I don't know why. It's very interesting. We don't know anything about Cole except that he was grief and rage stricken. Zarisa was abducted, but apparently later became an empress. So that's a pretty big transition. I'm really intrigued by the backstory of this game. There's a huge party whose fates are very much intertwined into this story. I don't know how much of their lives get, brought back in, other than your parents. But I hope they do, because they're very interesting to me. We also know that the Heavenly Temples had to get a new generation of disciples, and that this generation is considered greedy and venal because their last disciples basically all died. So there's definitely some political and spiritual upheaval, and possibly like very much lower standards, and that maybe some of the old religion is fading as people are less dedicated to it, or less dedicated in general. So that's interesting. I'm not sure what's going on with that. Your father is dead, apparently. Probably not a fairly long time ago, it sounds like. You were too young to really remember. And then finally, we learned that you have had a friend who is a troll, who is one of the aforementioned servitor races. No, we don't know how that came about. We also know that as you get up, you are careful of your height, suggesting that maybe you are a preteen or late teenager, that you maybe are a little bit younger, or just sort of coming into your own as an adult. So that's really interesting to me. This seems to be very much a coming of age story. As I have already said, we will be choosing the gender neutral or bi-gender option. So let's click on that. Let's check the chat. If there's anything that I'm saying that you want to add to or ask about, or express any thoughts about, feel free to do so in the chat. I will periodically take a break and look at that and read that and respond to the people. Someone's called the Blind GM, says hi. I don't know who that is, but hello and thanks for tuning in. I appreciate that. So we have chosen our gender. As is customary, you wear the elaborate shroud of the, As is customary, you wear the elaborate shroud of the androgyne whenever you are outside. This intricate garb is antiquated, outside the wildlands of the far northern tribes, or the water clans of the desert, the desert empire. But on the other hand, your mother says she took this shroud from the Golden Archer themselves, or themselves. So we have our first NPC who is neither binary gendered. That's pretty cool. We don't know why we are not really supposed to speak of them. Maybe to keep them safe, or maybe they have done something that has caused them to be exiled. We don't really know. I hope that we do find out, because that's really interesting. Without their heroism, King Hyris would never have defeated Haritha and her dark armies. So that's cool. Be wary of trolls, my child, Para calls as you move open the wooden door to your house. Today they come to trade, but yesterday they came to kill, enthralled by the dark axe Ron. Who can say what tomorrow might bring? They are not like people. Their souls are weak. They crave servitude, which is why we call them the servitor races. Yes, yes. But the dark axe is gone, and the trolls are free, and your friend Grumpet is waiting for you. You race through Hedge, the village of the Pine tribe, or rather, the town, as it has tripled in size since your mother became chieftain, and lured hunters and trappers from the Thorn tribe. This is not Star Wars. I did that yesterday too. The Thorn tribe, to their small community of artisans nestled deep in the woods. You run across the new bridge, which is tall enough that small boats can sail under it, and head for the forest and Gromp and the ruins of the Impossible Empire. Okay, so again, another fairly detail-rich passage. We learn, as I've mentioned, that there is another NPC who is non-bi-gendered. I don't know how else to word that, because we don't entirely know how they identify. But so, who was instrumental in the defeat of the Dark Armies. I'm not loving the, there's a whole race who just really wants to be subjugated thing. J.K. Rowling. That it's not great. I hope that gets better. I don't think my character takes maybe all the warnings about those things very seriously. I mean, she's had a troll friend her whole life. They've spent a lot of time with trolls, or at least with a troll. So I think they are a little bit skeptical of their mother's warnings, which makes sense because she's had, a lot of these bad experiences. So I think this is probably another point of contention between them and their mother. So that's interesting. We learn that this town is growing pretty rapidly under your mother's leadership, so that's pretty cool. I think it's still another reason that my character feels like they need to prove themselves a little bit, because, even after their mother basically saved the world, she doesn't stop, and she's just continuing to improve things. So I think she definitely has a little bit of a chip on her shoulder about, I also have to do some really important things and, live up to this great name. So, that's important. And we have hints of something called the Impossible Empire, which we will learn more about momentarily. It's pretty cool. Spoiler alert. Let's see if there's anything in the chats. That's great. The Blind GM says, I've been singing the Pirate King from Gilbert and Sullivan's Pirates of Penzance since you mentioned, pirates earlier. Yes, I do know who you are now. Now I want to go listen to the One Piece soundtrack myself, so I will have to do that later. Yeah, I hope you're enjoying the stream though. This is a cool game. I hope more people will play it because there's a lot of lore and a lot of world building in it that these games don't always have. So it's cool to see that being a bigger part of this. I think a lot of people have the perception that text-based games have to be very simplistic, and I like someone playing with these big, grandiose Final Fantasy-esque tropes in text in a way that we don't often see. So that's kind of why I chose this game. So you first met Grumpet, who is your troll friend, who is also a peddler. So you met Grumpet, the troll peddler, years ago during a particularly bitter winter when the ice winds flew down from Mount Olgas. The old chieftain, believing that the village had been cursed by a nymph, ventured into the woods and perished, crushed by a falling pine bough. Though your parents taught you well, you are no hero like them, and you made a mistake as a child that nearly killed you. So here you have the choices: I was frail and sickly as an infant, and the cold set into my bones, threatening to kill me. Or I lack resolve and steadfastness. As a child, I grew frightened when wolves howled, and hid in the freezing woods. Or I am occasionally foolish and inattentive. I lost track of time and was trapped outside at night. Now, I chose that option last stream, the third one, believing kind of that she maybe lost track of time while she was doing scholarly work, and then was caught outside. I was hoping that would be kind of the absent-minded scholar type. However, that option actually causes you to lose an intelligence stat. So this is one of those choice modes that I think could be a little bit better. Sometimes you pick an option thinking that you see that going one way and it intends to go another, or it's intended to change a different stat. I will not confirm or deny that I wanted to redo this chapter basically so I could fix this choice, but I am going to make a different one here because I don't actually want to lower my intelligence stat again. I am planning to write a choice of game, and so part of the reason I want to analyze these is looking at the ways that other people mean for or word their choices and what those actually correlate to. Because I think, a good GM does try to warn people of the trade-offs of what they're going to be choosing. And sometimes that's really clear and sometimes it's not as much. And this one, I definitely intended this one way, or I took this one way, and the writer of the game perceived it a different way. So no one, he wasn't wrong. It was his game. It's just, I misunderstood. So I'm going to pick a different choice here and be kind of aware when I am making these choices, how they might actually impact differently than you might think. So frail and sickly would definitely impact your might. Actually, let's look at the stats. We haven't actually looked at the stats yet. So we are renowned in grace and well-mannered in bearing. We are average in might, so that is our physical prowess. Our resolve is, I guess, like our will, and that is average. So is wisdom. We are a competent artisan and competent burglar. Both command and counsel are at 50. So are honesty and trickery, and so are mercy and wrath. so are innovation and tradition. So these are what are called opposed stats, which means they basically exist on a spectrum. As one goes up, the other will go down. So these are 4 pairs of opposed stats. We are uninjured, so that's good. So frail and sickly would probably impact might, I assume. Resolve and steadfastness is probably will. And foolish and attentive is well, I know from bad experience, is intelligence, wisdom, and stuff like that. So, let's do. I need to choose one of these. Let's do frail and sickly as an infant. Okay. So, yeah, someone kind of bookish, kind of physically not at their best. So we shall see if that ends up being a good choice. Your early childhood was one of frequent illness. When that winter came, you felt the cold reaching for your heart. And when your mother left to find the missing chieftain, you found yourself too weak to tend the fire. So I think that, yeah, there's definitely also an element of like your mother. I think my character might also kind of wonder if it came down to like the village or the character, if they would maybe choose the village. So there's a little bit of like, not quite mistrust, but like maybe overly self-reliant on this character a little bit as well. So you tried to reach your neighbor's hearth, but in a why are you not scrolling? A delirium of exhaustion, you collapsed in the snow outside your house. Wow. I mean, I knew we were frail, but like, what did we just crawl like 2 feet outside the house and just collapse? That's kind of sad. Okay. Hidden in the long shadows of the wall. So there you would have died, except that Grondpit found you and carried you to his fire pit in an old ruin. You were still frail, but you were strong enough to follow your indomitable mother, thankless to the toll. Yeah, so I mean, or thanks, sorry, no, that is thanks to the troll, not okay. So basically, thanks to the troll, you're able to still follow your mother. But Grondpit did more than save your life. He introduced you to the marvels of Nephrine, the Impossible Empire. So they're scattered all over the northern forest, but the ruins are nothing you can recognize. That empire of philosophers and miracle workers must that's a Skype message that I need to respond to in a moment. I'm sorry. No, I lost my place. But the ruins are nothing you can recognize. That empire of philosophers and miracle workers must have lived in houses, worshipped the gods in temples, supplied their cities with aqueducts and wells, yet none of that remains. Only strange heaps of rubble, sometimes marked with images or abstract designs, litter the three nations. Seeing those ruins for the first time as Grompitt's fire warmed your exhausted body, you marveled not just at the strange mosaics and broken writing, but at how none of the remaining pieces made any sense to you. The remains of the impossible empire still make no sense years later. As you reach the the remains of the impossible empire still make no sense years later. As you reach the outskirts of the ruins, you slow and pull your blue-gray shroud close to protect yourself from the chill winds. No one else comes here. No one else cares about a civilization that fell centuries ago. Only you and Grompitt, and he only visits once per year when his family passes through Hetch to trade. The first one, Grompitt shouts behind you. The very first one. Do you remember the sight? You remember the first mosaic that stopped you in your tracks. So before we make this choice, again, there's a lot of info dump in this chapter, or this little passage. So we learned that there is an empire called Nephrine, which had philosophers and miracle workers, but none of their ruins are really recognizable. We learned that the bond between you and Grompitt is, I think, fairly strong, at least for you, because there's definitely that affinity of having someone who cares about this really antiquated thing that basically only you and he care about. So I think some of the strangeness of having a troll friend is kind of mitigated for you by the fact that you share this deep fascination with these ancient ruins that also hold a fascination for, he saved your life there. So I don't see this person as being hugely popular in the village. So, I mean, for the first time, it's someone that they were told that they weren't really supposed to be friends with, who was maybe weak or not worthy of their friendship. But they were saved by this person and taught about a new history. So that's very powerful. That's a very affecting, relationship for you, I think. So now we have to choose which mosaic first fascinated us when we were sort of thought we were going to die here. But first, let's think back to what we learned about the Impossible Empire. Yeah, for sure. Yay, mommy issues, the blind GM says. Let's see. Frail / sickly option is usually the one for smart characters. Lots to unpack with that. But the trope is the trope. Yeah, I mean, so for sure Raceland is kind of an inspiration a little bit here in some ways. I don't always choose that option, but I accidentally lowered my intelligence last time, so I didn't want to do that again. So I think she doesn't exactly have mommy issues in the sense that she hates her mother or something. I think she just, there's tension there, as there is in every family. So and I mean, I think for her mother, you go from being this great world-changing person, and with world-changing power and responsibility, and you go to I'm gonna lead this little chief, be the chieftain of this little village and raise my kid. No matter how happy you are to settle down and be, have a normal life. There's a little bit of like,
Go lay down.
I kind of miss the old days, you know, no matter how terrible they were, because I mean, having a purpose is important, and even we see that even though there isn't really any immediate danger, this person continues to grow her community to the best that it can be, expanding it and stuff like that, and also kind of pushing their kid to be the best that they can be as well. So I think we definitely do have a situation here where there are maybe two different definitions of heroics that these people are kind of living by. Something of an old guard, like a military heroicism, versus like this character is maybe a little bit less physically brawny, but like more strategical. So yeah, it's definitely a trope. It's kind of worn, but I think this is a good exploration of it. So yeah. Okay, so now it is info dump about the Impossible Empire, which is actually really interesting. So this is a cool lore. I'm excited to see what comes of it from here. So most of what you know of the Impossible Empire you have pieced together with Grompit, working together to glean clues from the ruins or to learn from scholars and philosophers. Rising from the ashes of the world's near destruction, the Impossible Empire began a millennium and a half ago as philosophical academy far to the north. When these philosophers learned to access the Auriculum. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Oh, my roommate is coming in with our puppy and a guest. I may have to get off the stream. I'd like to finish this chapter. Oh well. Well, let's maybe start this paragraph over. It's distracting.
Come on in.
Sorry.
Hey. Come here.
No, you're good.
Hey, come here.
You're good, bro.
Come on in, there's places to sit. Hey, good girl.
Yeah, I may have to come back to this. Unfortunately, I'd like to have finished this chapter. There's not really anywhere else I can go in here. But yeah, I appreciate you tuning in. We typically won't have company at this time, so this will be the normal time that I will be streaming on Wednesdays. I am sorry for the interruption, and hopefully next time we will learn more about the Impossible Empire and this character. And actually give them a name, because they need a name. I'm tired of calling them this character.
You look like bomb at your house.
Yeah, I think I still have it. I've kind of indefinitely claimed it as my own, but if you want it back, you're welcome to.
I just want to look at it.
Wait, we're losing our bong? We can't lose our bong? That's on my stream now, forever and ever. Oh well. I don't really care that much.
But then we got kicked out, so it was fine. It's a good thing you had it.
How do I end this?